Look up on this street, and you'd swear you were in a forest. Big, healthy trees. Full canopies. Real shade. Now, look down. Underneath this sidewalk isn't just dirt and pipes. It's an entire engineered structure. Plastic frames, deep soil chambers, drainage systems, built specifically to keep a tree alive. And cities are now spending billions of dollars building this stuff. Not parks. Not forests you can actually walk into. Underground infrastructure for trees. For most of modern city history, engineers didn't think trees needed any of this. A hole, some dirt, done. And it turns out that mistake was quietly killing city trees by the millions for decades, without anyone realizing the real problem was never above the ground at all. It was buried right beneath everyone's feet the whole time. For most of the 20th century, if you wanted to plant a tree on a city street, the process looked painfully simple. Dig a small square hole in the sidewalk, drop the tree in, surround it with a little dirt, and cover the rest with concrete or pavement. It looked fine. For a while. But here's the thing nobody accounted for. A tree's roots aren't just an anchor. They're basically its lungs, its stomach, and its water supply all in one. In a real forest, tree roots spread out far beyond the edge of the canopy, sometimes 2 or 3 times wider than the tree itself, soaking up water, breathing in soil oxygen, and slowly building the underground network that holds the whole tree up. Now picture that same tree, planted in a tiny sidewalk cutout, boxed in on every side by rock-hard, compacted soil, pavement, and buried pipes. Roots hit that wall of compacted dirt almost immediately, and simply can't go any further. Compacted urban soil can be so dense that it barely holds any oxygen at all, which means the roots underneath a city sidewalk are essentially trying to survive by suffocating slowly. The result was heartbreaking and expensive. City trees, on average, were dying shockingly young, often within just 7 to 10 years of being planted, compared to the decades or centuries the same species could easily live in an open forest. Cities poured money into planting trees for shade, beauty, and cooling, and then quietly poured more money into ripping out the dead ones and starting over. Year after year, block after block. For a long time, everyone assumed the problem was pollution or road salt or car exhaust, something happening above ground, where you could actually see it. Then, starting in the late 1980s and into the 90s, a handful of urban foresters and soil scientists, researchers like Nina Basic at Cornell University, started asking a different question entirely. What if the real crisis wasn't visible at all? What if it was happening in total silence, underneath the sidewalk, where a shovel could dig for hours and never find the actual cause? They started studying compacted urban soil directly, and the discovery reframed the entire problem. It wasn't smog. It wasn't the trees themselves. It was space. Or rather, the total lack of it. Cities had been building sidewalks strong enough to hold the weight of trucks and pedestrians, and in doing so, had accidentally been crushing the one thing every tree actually needs to survive. That single realization is the reason cities are now digging up sidewalks and pouring billions of dollars into something almost nobody driving or walking overhead will ever notice. So what does an actual underground forest system look like? Turns out, it's less like a garden and more like a hidden piece of engineering, closer to something you'd find holding up a bridge than something you'd find in a flower bed. 1. Trees now get planted in giant underground vaults, not holes. Instead of a small dirt pocket, engineers dig out a huge, continuous trench beneath the sidewalk, sometimes running the entire length of a city block, and fill it with modular plastic frames stacked like milk crates. These structures, often called soil cells or silvacells, are strong enough to bear the full weight of a sidewalk, a fire truck, even a building's foundation loads pressing down from above, while leaving the space inside them completely open and loose for roots to spread through freely. 2. The soil itself gets engineered, not just dumped in. It's not ordinary dirt. Cities now use specially designed structural soil, a mix that stays loose and full of air pockets even when packed down hard, so roots can still breathe and grow through it without the whole thing collapsing under pavement. One tree can now be given 30, 50, sometimes over 100 times more usable soil than the tiny sidewalk pit it would have gotten a few decades ago. 3. These vaults double as invisible flood control. Here's the twist almost nobody expects. These underground tree systems aren't just about trees anymore. Because the soil inside is so loose and absorbent, it can soak up massive amounts of rainwater during a storm, water that would otherwise flood streets or overload city sewers. So a single tree pit isn't just feeding a tree. It's quietly acting like a sponge for the entire block, buffering the city against flash floods. 4. And yes, this is genuinely expensive. A single block-length soil cell installation can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Cities like New York, Washington, D.C., and Toronto have already poured tens of millions into these systems as part of larger urban forestry plans, and some experts estimate that scaling this kind of infrastructure citywide could eventually run into the billions, once you add up every sidewalk, plaza, and parking strip that gets the upgrade. So, why would any city justify spending that kind of money on dirt nobody will ever see? Because a mature, healthy street tree isn't just decoration, it's a piece of climate infrastructure. A single large tree can cool the street around it by several degrees on a hot day, simply through shade and evaporation, sometimes enough to measurably lower a neighborhood's temperature during a heat wave. Multiply that across an entire city block, and suddenly a tree starts looking a lot more like air conditioning nobody has to plug in. There's a brutal math problem underneath all of it, though. A tree planted in the old, cramped sidewalk hole style might die and need replacing every 7 to 10 years, meaning the city pays to plant it over and over, forever, without ever getting the real payoff, because the payoff only kicks in once a tree survives long enough to grow a full, mature canopy. A tree given real root space, on the other hand, can live for decades, even centuries, meaning that expensive underground vault isn't really a cost at all. It's a one-time investment that keeps paying the city back in shade, flood control, and cleaner air for 100 years or more. Turns out the most powerful climate investment some cities are making right now isn't a park, a solar farm, or a shiny new building. It's dirt. Buried, boring, invisible dirt, quietly holding up 100 years of shade. If this changed how you look at the sidewalk under your feet, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more hiding beneath the cities we walk through every day.